An Air India plane bound for London with more than 240 people on board has crashed in India's western city of Ahmedabad. Officials say there are no known survivors. The Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner went down shortly after taking off from Ahmedabad's airport. Local media are reporting the aircraft crashed on a medical college hostel. The number of victims on the ground is unclear. Emergency crews are at the scene in Ahmedabad. The aircraft reportedly gave a mayday call, signalling an emergency shortly after takeoff. Rebecca Bundhun joins me now live from Mumbai with more on this. Rebecca, so finally the confirmation that investigators, those on the ground working out, trying to establish what had happened, were waiting for confirmation from the police commissioner, is that right, of Gujarat, confirming that there are likely no survivors?
Yes, that's right. And we understand from comments from authorities that more than 100 bodies have already been recovered. And now that indication coming through that it's a very real possibility that there are no survivors from this crash at all. There were understood to be 242 people on this plane that took off from Ahmedabad in Gujarat in Western India. It was meant to fly to London Gatwick on a very, very busy route. But just shortly after takeoff, it appears that the plane was struggling to actually gain altitude, and that at about 600 feet, according to flight trackers, it then came down. There appears to have been an explosion, a massive fire. There were visuals of huge plumes of smoke. And of course, rescue teams rushed to the site, firefighters, dozens of ambulances. It also crashed into a residential area. So that's another concern, that it may not just be those people on the flight, but also locals who have been affected by this. It's understood the plane actually hit into a medical hostel, according to reports and some of the visuals that we've seen coming through.
So this moves, Rebecca, from being a rescue and recovery operation to simply a recovery operation. I mean, what more do we know about those who were on board the aircraft when it crashed?
Yes, largely there were Indian nationals on board. They're also understood to have been a number of British people, more than 50 British people. Likely that most, if not all of them, were British people of Indian origin, because we know that there are these strong connections between Gujarat and the UK. There's a very large Gujarati population in London, in the UK, very strong connections in general between India and the United Kingdom. This was a very busy route. So largely Indian nationals, it appears, on board. Also one Canadian, 9 people with Portuguese passports, again likely to have been of Indian origin. And there was an emergency centre. There is an emergency centre that's been set up by Air India. Also, the helpline, which allows relatives to phone through. A lot of people are very concerned about their family in this situation. But yes, that is a very busy route, and the flight was fairly full, it seems.
And what kind of details are actually being shared by the airline and the aviation authorities in India at this early stage in the investigation, Rebecca?
Yeah, so the response so far, really, and the comments that we've seen coming through from the Aviation Ministry, from Air India, they've really been saying that they're focusing on this emergency response to the situation, given the magnitude of this accident, the fact that they had to try and swiftly respond and deal with this. Air India has described it as a tragic accident. The Aviation Ministry in India has also said that it's giving its full support to the emergency operation that's been taking place over the past few hours. Boeing has also commented that it's been in touch with Air India, and it's been trying to gather more details. It's also come as a bit of surprise, the actual carrier that was involved, the Boeing aircraft, which was a 787-8 Dreamliner, which is a relatively newer plane, and it hasn't been involved in accidents in the past of this kind. And it was sort of a flagship airline for Air India as well, flagship aircraft rather.
All right, Rebecca, many thanks for that. Rebecca Bundhun with the updates for us from Mumbai. Let's cross now to Milena Veselinovic, who's at London's Gatwick Airport. Milena, there are, from what we understand from Air India, a large number of British nationals on board this aircraft. Presumably those with loved ones on board the aircraft will be arriving there at Gatwick Airport, some of them looking for urgent answers. How is the airport and airline responding where you are?
That's right, Neve. 53 of those on board are British nationals, and Gatwick Airport said that they are going to be putting up a reception centre for the family and relatives of those who were on board in order to provide support for them and information. For the time being, they are keeping these people away from the media glare, which you can understand why at such a sensitive time. But this has had a lot of outpouring of sympathy here in the UK, perhaps because of that high number of British nationals on board. We've heard also an updated statement from Buckingham Palace, from King Charles and Queen Camilla, who said that they were deeply shocked by what happened this morning in Ahmedabad, and that thoughts and prayers were with everyone, their loved ones across so many nations, they say, now waiting to hear updates about their family members. They also paid tribute to what they said were heroic efforts of the first responders on scene. Now, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that he was being closely updated on the developments of this crash. He called the scene of this horrible incident devastating in his own words, and he said that his thoughts were with the families of those who were on board. Now, the UK Foreign Office has set up crisis teams both here in the UK and in India in order to help British nationals and support them in any way possible. And we will have more updated statements from Gatwick Airport as well. I think it's also important to note that we've had a second statement from Boeing in which they said that they are working with Air India to try to determine the cause of this crash, that they remain available to them for any kind of support that they may need, and their thoughts as well are with the relatives of those on board.
OK, Milena, many thanks for the update. Milena Veselinovic, London's Gatwick Airport, the British capital's second largest transport hub. Well, Derry Tozer is an aviation analyst and former pilot. He joins me now from Rye, also in the UK. Mr. Tozer, welcome to Al Jazeera. So what plans, I wonder if you can clarify, immediately whirl into action in the aftermath of a disaster like this?
Well, obviously, the investigators will be there as soon as they possibly can. I mean, obviously, it's not a site where they can probably get hold of any aircraft parts very easily because of the fire. But, you know, it will be of prime concern to them to get to the wreckage as soon as they can.
Ahmedabad, as we know, is a big bustling city, somewhere between 7 and 8 million people in that city. Reports of a hostel housing medical trainees also being hit as this aircraft crashed into the ground. Do the emergency contingency plans that exist within the perimeters of an airport also extend to the surrounding areas?
Well, you'd have to ask the civil authorities there, I think, to get an answer to that. I mean, obviously, crash crews on an airport will always be aware of the fact that when something like this happens, they could need to be off airport pretty quickly, at least in the near vicinity. But I wouldn't be able to comment on what local arrangements there would be.
We're in the early stages, of course, of an investigation. Details are slowly coming to light. Visuals, as we've been seeing, show thick black smoke rising up into the sky. The crash happening, as we know, moments after takeoff. A mayday was called just before the crash happened. And according to some images that we've been seeing, the aircraft landing gear appeared to be in a down position. Just connecting the threads here, what do you draw from all of that?
Well, the things that, I mean, every public transport aircraft, and this is no exception, is required to be able to suffer a major failure at the critical point of takeoff and continue safely. So I don't think it would have been anything to do with an engine failure. From the pictures that we've seen, there doesn't appear to be takeoff flaps set. Now, an aircraft will not take off and climb safely without that. So we now have to wonder why. If that is in fact the case. After takeoff, you would normally be looking for the aircraft climbing away safely. Then you would raise the undercarriage, and the flaps would be raised much, much later. If the flaps were not set prior to takeoff, there would be all kinds of warnings and that the crew would see. People can forget, make mistakes, but the systems are designed to alert them. So were the flaps retracted too soon while the undercarriage was still down? Very hard to say. I mean, everything is conjecture at the moment, but it will not take off and climb away without takeoff flap.
Everything, as you say, is conjecture, but you seem to suggest that this is likely to have been pilot error rather than some sort of technical catastrophic failure.
It could have been a technical problem. I wouldn't like to point the finger at this very unfortunate crew. Most aircraft crashes do have a human element involved in them, but there is usually more than one factor, usually a combination of factors. But the glaring question in this instance is that if there were no flaps set, the big question is why.
What about security at this particular airport and indeed other airports across India and the subcontinent? Are they in any way, in your mind, cause for concern?
I'm really not qualified to comment. I'm not familiar with the place, really.
All right. Terry Tozer, good to hear your thoughts and expert analysis on all of this. Thanks for joining us on Al Jazeera.
No problem.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.